Thank you for joining us all this morning. I know it's difficult, the last day of the conference. I can imagine that some of you haven't gotten that much sleep last night, so we do appreciate the effort to come and sit here. If you start nodding off, if you could sit at the back, then we don't see you too much, would be great. And if you start snoring, someone will come and kick you. This is not an easy topic to talk about this early in the morning, especially after having so much fun, but we do believe that it is one of utmost importance because, well, I think every time we open the newspapers, every time we listen to the news, there's some kind of crisis happening somewhere in the world, whether it be the recent floods in the south of Argentina, in Porto Alegre, or the floods in Kenya, the recent earthquake in Taiwan, and on and on and on. And even in boring countries like Belgium, where I live, we have seen political or social unrest. We are seeing that the world seems to be in turmoil, and it is affecting us not only in our personal lives, but also in our businesses. Now, sometimes risk management is just a tick box that you have to do, for example, for your FAME audit, until all of a sudden, bam, it hits in. I think the most strong example we had was the pandemic. No one saw that one coming, and the world came to an end. Now the pandemic is over, and life as normal has started again, and we have all forgotten about it. But there are some companies and some countries where, risk and crisis is a constant reality, and so you have to learn to live with a world in crisis on your doorstep. And that is why we invited our panel today, because each one in their own way has had to face and overcome a crisis, or some have even made a business model out of crisis management. So today the idea is not a political debate, and we will be very, very strict about this, because we had a bit of a debate in the office if we should tackle such a difficult topic, knowing what's happening in the world. We have decided yes, but it will be focused on risk management and crisis management as a company. We won't accept a political debate that you can do outside of the room. The idea today is to see how do you as a company really ensure that you embed risk management and crisis management within your company so that it is a reality and not only a tick box exercise. I will let my panelists introduce themselves first.
Hi everyone, I'm Curt, Clemens. Can everybody hear this one? I'm from Move One, based in Dubai.
I'm Ebru Demirel, based in Turkey with ASYA International Movers.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Anthony Shipp. I'm from Dyer Global, and we're based out of Honolulu, Hawaii.
Morning, everybody. Malcolm Pearson from Reason Global Insurance, Lloyd's a London broker based in the UK.
So if we want to understand the purpose and the fundamentals of risk management for our companies, I think maybe it's first important to define what do we actually mean with a crisis. So a crisis situation would be an unexpected emergency situation that poses a great risk to your operations, to your staff, your clients, or the communities in which you live, which can be short-term and very local, like the fires in Maui not too long ago, or it can be long-term and global, like the COVID pandemic, for example, right? So, Anthony, taking the example of the fires in August 2023, can you explain a bit how you reacted and what came out of that terrible, terrible catastrophe?
Yeah, certainly. So back in the summer of 2003, on August 8th, I think if you were watching the news, we had basically the perfect storm. I mean, it was hurricane-level winds on Maui. Then it was on a very dry portion of the island, and there's speculation that it was basically an electrical tower that fell down into the tall grass, and it ignited a fire that was pretty significant, and it burned through within about 36 minutes the entire town of Lahaina. So for those who've been familiar and been to the island of Maui, it was a huge, huge tragedy. Impacted, and there was actually 3 fires that happened on that island. The one that we saw on the news was in the town of Lahaina, and it burned roughly about 6,500 homes between all those 3 fires. As far as Dyer, we that following morning when I woke up, some staff had come to me and asked about putting together a GoFundMe for some employees that were impacted. Having kind of processing that and so forth, I just at that moment thought, well, we got to do something bigger than that than just impacting a few people. How could we actually come together as a community? So I quickly put out a call to action for our staff and the community from the island of Oahu, which is roughly about 121 nautical miles from the island of Maui. And within 48 hours, we were able to assemble an enormous amount of supplies that were needed on the island of Maui, and we shipped it over through the barge service and got it there fairly quickly.
And the outcome of that was that you were invited to sit on the U.S. FEMA board for Hawaii, right? To then work with them on risk mitigation strategies for the entire for the islands.
Yeah.
Right?
So after the events had happened and sort of this made local news and it was impactful. As far as what Dyer was doing specifically for that, I got an invitation from the local Hawaii FEMA to sit on a committee board to deal with these type of situations. Because as you can imagine, in Hawaii, I mean, it's 2,500 nautical miles from any other, from the continental United States. So trying to resolve these type of crisis situations is a significant challenge, as you can imagine. So, FEMA now looked at this, and recently I think we were supposed to have our FIDI conference in Puerto Rico, and if you all remember the hurricanes there, Hawaii in many ways is in a similar situation. So to be able to react and have the community come together, especially with businesses that are integrated into providing services that are necessary to support these type of efforts, we were invited in order to be able to participate in that in future events.
And Curt, so your LinkedIn tagline is, "We go where others can't, won't, or don't." So you seem to have made it a business model to go and operate in countries where no one else wants to go. So how do you manage that on a daily basis? And what stories have you seen? You must have seen all kinds of situations.
Yeah, I think we didn't necessarily make the business model, it kind of found us. And, once you get into this type of business, you get pulled along with all your customers. So, every day there's something new. It's imprecise information. You get half the story. So managing risk is, I think it's kind of like a flood. You don't stop it. You just kind of direct the risk, and you decide how much risk you're willing to take.
That's a very good point. But like, Move One has offices in Sudan, in Ethiopia, in Syria, in Ukraine now.
Yeah, I think for us the biggest challenge is the legal requirements. So we're an American-owned company, and that often dictates where we can participate. The earthquakes in Syria and Turkey were a big challenge for us. We were mobilizing with our customers. They often will call us, but it was kind of the last minute that the U.S. government took sanctions off for humanitarian aid. But still, even though the U.S. government will take the sanctions off, your bank may not. So, and the bank will, at least our bank, will never tell us what their sanctions are. So you take a great risk financially and, having the continuity of your business if you pay the wrong person and the bank, they're on their compliance list.
So you say you need to redirect risk and you need to define and identify risk. So according to you, what are the basic principles that need to be taken into account when you start your risk management strategy?
I think, our number one is our contacts. So that's why we like these conferences, because we're not everywhere, and I don't think you can plan where the next natural disaster or the next political conflict's going to be. So we have to use all of you when we move quickly. So, when something happens and we're asked to participate, we'll sit together and talk to each other and say, who do we know? What are their capabilities? What financing do we need to bring? I think that's a big thing we bring to the party is aid organizations are not structured to take financial risk, and very few of them can make financial decisions on the go. So we'll get in touch with our partners, we'll figure out how to get money and financing in, and then often we're a neutral arbitrator. So, often we'll come and You know, the two parties may not be talking to each other, but maybe sometimes they're willing to talk to us. So it's, there's never, each project we work on is different. So, and oftentimes I think the best thing we do is we just get on the ground. So you can plan all you want, but then when you show up, none of the planning makes sense until you're actually there and seeing what's happening on the ground.
Yeah, that's where the buzzword of agility comes in. Right? You need to keep some kind of agility and last-minute reaction
And
space.
with these earthquakes, I think
Yeah.
getting on the ground was difficult. So, you know, airports are closed, and getting as close as possible to where the aid needs to be delivered is a big challenge. And then communications and tracking your staff. Where are your staff? What conditions are they in? You know, what happens in a medical emergency and medevac, and having all of that structured and ready to go. And again, the plans never work. So you have all these plans, but it never, you know, it's squaring that circle.
So basically you're saying no plan is better than a bad plan, so you might as well
It
not
just-
tick the boxes.
Yeah, you can make all the plans you want, they just never work.
Okay, I just hope that the famed auditors are not sitting in here because that's maybe not what I want to hear. But one thing that came up a lot during our preparation calls was the key part of communication and communication across the board, whether it's with your staff, with your clients, because no news is the worst thing that you can do in a crisis situation. Anthony, you had an interesting example of how you manage this communication within your company to ensure that you know exactly where each of your staff member is when something happens.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody's over inundated with a lot of different communication tools. We've sort of narrowed it down where, I mean, obviously we use WhatsApp groups. We're on the Google Workspace system, so we have an internal chat system as well. So that was certainly impactful for us to, in the case for the Maui fires, to be able to just get the messaging out fairly quickly. And of course, we utilize social media. But we do have a system on which we're able to have the leadership. Just think of it like a tree and branches, and that they just communicate, and so everybody knows who they need to connect with, so we have accountability all the way up. So we certainly use that capability. For me, specifically on the communication part, where I was, it exceeded my expectations on the amount of response that happened on that particular fire. So one of my biggest challenges was, like, what do we do on the other end of Maui? So we didn't have a really broad network of who we were going to get the supplies to, so that I spent quite a bit of time on communicating with my network and contacts to make sure that we were getting it in the right place, and it was going to effectively get to the point where it was going to be a triage type center.
And what we hear and the way the FAME process also works, that you have the basic principles that you need to take into account is define and assess risk, and then find ways to mitigate that risk, right? But how do you, I'll take an example of Belgium, where nothing ever happens in Belgium. How do we identify and define risks, knowing that, to your point, well, you never know what might happen. So how do you go about assessing the risk situation in which you are operating now? Curt, do you have an idea there?
For me?
Yes.
Well, and again, since, you know, recently we had some bad floods in Dubai. Mm-hmm. So if you were the emergency response and you knew that was your job, you can define risk and you can plan and you can make contingency plans and what happens if this and then that. For us, it's a bit different. We don't know where we're going to be. We have some structural communication. We have basic medevac planning. We have insurance. We have financing. But for us, we don't know where it's going to be next. So it's really quite difficult. It's usually on the go. So we're usually getting people as close to the problem as possible and then working through the process from there.
We'll get back to that one afterwards. But Anthony, when we spoke, you had a very interesting take on how to assess risk, because of course for those companies of us that are not specialists, the first idea would be, I'll go and pay a fancy consultant to come up with a risk report. And you said that maybe that's not the right way forward, or not the best way forward.
Yeah, I think in the marketplace you'll find oftentimes, especially if you're looking at how to deal with risk mitigation, that there's certainly a lot of consultants and experts out there. I think you don't want to underestimate the talent within your own organization to be able to deal with those type of risky situations. So we kind of took a paradigm thought of, what does our insurance companies want from us in terms of mitigating certain risks? So obviously, we have fire, flood, hurricane threats and things of that nature. So like what programs and policies are you putting in place in order that your staff can be reactive to if those events happen and what the next step is going to be? So, when we were talking, my thought was, why don't you put together your own risk plan and come up, based around the foundation of your insurance products that you've bought to deal with those issues, and do you have a qualified set of processes in place in order to deal with that, and just pass it off to your insurance provider and say, hey, take a look at this and see if this validates what you want us to do in order to keep our premium down, or at least meet the minimum threshold or of what you're looking at from an insurance product. And then maybe where you probably get your best money spent would be, once you've already consolidated that and put that together yourself, then shoot that off to a consultant and just pay them to review that, to just take a look at that and say, is this good enough? What would you add to this that we may have missed?
And that also would have the positive effect of actually engaging your staff with what risk management really is in their day-to-day life. Because what we see often, I see that in our fire drills sometimes in the office. We might have a drill every 6 months. We have no idea what to do. And it is a tick box exercise, and usually it happens right in the moment when you really, really don't need it, so you don't really care. But it may be by flipping it around and saying, okay, so what would your solution be? That actually engages the staff as well, and could be the defining factor of a good reaction towards a crisis than not knowing what to do when the fire alarm goes off. So maybe that's something we could work on in the office as well.
Yeah, to that point, because we talked about that. So, part of our insurance product is we have obviously fire sprinkler system throughout the entire warehouse. So that has, like, every 3 months, the fire sprinkler testing guy comes in and looks at purging through the system and making sure that it's effectively working. And then, of course, that report has to go back to the insurance company. But it makes sense for us to obviously run a fire drill, because I think in the event, if that was to happen, you had a fire, where do people need to consolidate, and how do we have accountability that everybody got out of the building and that they are safe? So it's kind of matching up what you're doing, Art, on one side to what would be the next step, and putting those together would obviously be something that would be beneficial for your organization.
So you mentioned about how involving your insurance company in that loop. Malcolm, as the insurance specialist on this stage, what would your recommendations be for any company here when choosing their insurance policies? What do they need to look out for?
Exactly what Andy just said, because he sounds like my dream client. I think the reality is that insurance is sometimes one of those subjects that people don't want to think about, because it then leaves them thinking about worst case scenarios. Our job is to try and help them think about those worst case scenarios without making it too depressing, and appreciating they've got a business to run day to day. I think the main sort of trends that we look at that are important in this day and age, climate change is making a huge difference to how insurers are looking at risk, whether that be static risks that can flood, whether that be sea events for containers being shipped around the world. We're starting to see a lack of appetite and more stringent conditions around what they want to do. I think that general average being declared on 2 ships recently has really highlighted the importance of marine insurance for people, because if they've got cargo on those boats, as you know, with general average, they're going to be responsible for some significant costs that could be covered by insurance. Cyber's becoming more relevant as more and more attacks are happening around the world. And I think the geopolitical situation is a difficult one. As Curt said, you can't plan for these things. But we had a situation where we're a UK-based business, we're a Lloyd's of London broker. Some sanctions came in very quickly on certain countries, certain people around the world. But at the same time, we were being asked to arrange insurance for assignees to be moved out of those countries. And that was a real challenge. And I think that the more you plan for these things as a business, the better it is. No one knows your business like you. We as a broker can assist, but ultimately the real strength is exactly what you say. If you know your business and you're making those plans, and then you involve your insurance broker early in those processes, it can only lead to a better result for everyone involved.
So I see that at home. normally when the economy isn't doing too well or you have other priorities, the first thing to be cut down is insurance. I remember back in my moving days when our sales team would promise wonders to the clients, and the clients would come back and you would say, well, what about insurance? And don't worry too much about it. Nothing ever happens. How can you respond to that? How can our companies make sure that the clients also understand the importance of what can happen when they might move once or twice in their lives, and how bad can it get?
It's a real challenge, and unfortunately insurance is often sold through fear. That's the brutal truth of it, because it's fear of the unknown and what might go wrong. I think, I was a mover for 10 years. I used to sell marine insurance to clients, and I used to be quite blunt about it and say, we'll pack everything up perfectly at this end. Our agents will do a great job at the other end. It's at sea for 6 weeks, and I don't sail boats. And you talk about storms and these kind of things and everything else. There's a fear element. You don't really want to do it, but ultimately you're trying to make sure they've got the right cover. You try and do it as positively as you can. I think from the point of view of our clients, movers that we work with, you're absolutely right. One of the things, when things get tough and margins are squeezed and you're looking at how you can control costs, often you look at things like, I've got, for example, business interruption insurance for my warehouse and my storage, and I've got 36 months of that, but actually, do you know what? I'm probably okay with 24 months. I'm probably okay with 12 months. And they're the most challenging conversations because, we're not trying to make you take insurance for longer than you need or for more than you need. The advice we're giving is based on the fact that we believe you need it. And we're quite proud of doing that. So when someone comes to us and says, well, we're going to cut this back, actually what often happens is we lose the business. Because our advice is, we're not overly comfortable with this. Ultimately, it is your choice as a business, and you can make that choice, but we're not overly comfortable with it. I think that not everyone takes that approach, and I think that's very important. If you go to a specialist, if you go to an advisor in any sphere of life, you hope you're going to get the right advice.
So going to start with risk management as a company, especially when you're a small company, and again, if you live in a boring country like Belgium, it might seem something very abstract, and following the pandemic, in our FAME program, we decided to really beef up the risk management pillar based on the experience that we all gained through the pandemic. So Ebru, you used to be the FAME Supervisory Committee Chair. What does the current FAME standard say when it comes to risk management? And how can a company actually use that to structure their risk management?
I think it was back in 2022 when this pillar came, risk management also involved in the FAME quality program. And Curt made a very good statement. When it comes to choose the network partners, he relies on the FIDI network. And this also shows that we always try to explain our affiliates. Quality is, FAME is not, it's a living document, and it's under process, under review constantly. So, like we talk here, we are going through a crisis, and it looks like it's not going to end. So there might be other crises in the near future. Whenever something happens, FAME will be always trying to amend and just make sure that it's still valid according to today's environment. So coming back to the risk assessment pillar of FAME quality certificate is, you all know the whole program more or less, or you can review online. But the main idea is the decision is not expected to be made by the owners, by the top people. It is like in real life, sitting all together with business managers, involving them to the decision process, identifying the risks, and the whole idea is, of course, we talk about business continuity, which is important, but the ultimate aim of this risk management is to make sure the company is resilient when there is a crisis or something. I think majority of the affiliates are family-owned businesses. There are different size of companies, but for instance, for us, being a company out of Turkey, we believe we are great company in Turkey, but we can only do so much, and FAME in that sense gives us it gives us all the tools. And it is up to us to use it and improve our standards for sure. So I'm a big believer on FAME, and I'm sure in the next years we will see similar steps taken by the FAME Coordination Center and the FAME Supervisory Committee together with the board to make sure that there will be even more steps to be taken, not only on the risk management, but anything other than that business environment requires.
Yeah, and just like any topic or any pillar in FAME, FAME is very much process-based, right? So we don't say what exactly you need to do, but it is, again, you have to assess and define, train your staff, make sure it's in bed, make sure you have a verification process, and so it's very structured, right? So if we would have one thing to have for the audience to take back is use the FAME pillar as a first step to structure your risk management policy, right? So one thing is reacting to a crisis. Another one is to operate in a constantly volatile and constantly difficult environment. Like, so for example, Ebru, you're based in Turkey, which is definitely not Belgium. How do you ensure that your company can survive and can operate constantly in an environment where, well, crisis is a daily occurrence?
I mean, it's living in Turkey our life is always ups and downs, politically, economically, geographically. We are in a tough geography as well. I mean, for instance, all these. We are all talking about high inflation ratio, and in Turkey it is little over 100%. So people are unhappy. So there are many things that we need to consider. Young generation is not seeing any future in Turkey, so they are considering other jobs in Europe, Western world, wherever they can find. So we need to keep the talents. We need to make sure that company is financially solid. So it's, of course, we are the second generation. Our father is the founder of the company, and whatever I hear here, I try to go back to my father, and that it's, the businesses volumes are going down, and he's just very cool. It's his life. It's not the first time he's facing. I think we keep talking. Diversifying the business is very important. We are seeing a great benefit. I mean, when we first started with the fine art, I was trying to sell our company to the big fine art movers in the world, and they were always asking, are you also doing household goods moves? And like looking down, you're not a fine art mover really. But I also see them now trying to do household goods moving. Then we started with the DSP. We just add additional business lines. None of them are huge, but they help us in the international business environment to be the choice for different service needs. And of course, I'm going to come back to the FAME here, credit risk barometer. I find it very valuable. It's a third party validating our financials. Okay, we believe we are a solid company, but it's always good to have a approval, a validation from a third party. And right now, all the financial crises, especially Turkey being extreme in that sense, it also helps us to show it to our clients that, we make sure that your goods will be in safe hands. Because yes, clients go with the cheapest prices, but they also hear some horror stories where the shipments are stuck, and they want to make sure that the company they work with is a reliable, financially stable.
And I think mitigating risk, diversification.
Absolutely.
It's now the new buzzword. When we got into the business, people weren't diversified. We're a mover. That's all we do. We're the best mover. We have air ride trucks. We have big warehouses. That's what we do. So I think everybody's going through that now. So, currency changes, sanctions, you know, in addition to all the things we've talked about, that's probably one of the things we feel most comfortable about, because one year part of our business is doing great, the other parts are not doing so great. So it's, I think most successful companies have a good diversification to spread the risk.
Yeah, to avoid putting all your eggs in one basket and then tripping over it. Yeah. So operational resilience is a bit what we're talking about. It's not one of those complicated buzzwords when you talk about risk mitigation and insurance. And, so to define operational resilience, it would be to ensure that your company can operate and react and learn from an emergency that happens. So one question that I think was Anthony that was interested in knowing from you, Curt, talking about talent retention, talent acquisition, how the hell do you find people who are willing to work for a moving company stuck in South Sudan or Syria? How do you do that? Well, everybody here complains about talent retention and talent acquisition. How do you do it?
Not normal recruiting. Okay. Again, it's surprising that there's a lot of people out there. I always say we're the kind of box of misfit toys, you know, from Toy Story, that there's a lot of people that work in this aid world or work in these areas that would not fit in a normal corporate structure, but they're looking for a career and, you know, a chance to do something meaningful. So we actually pick up quite a few people in these areas and then train them and move them around and give them some career development.
But then, and how do you, so next complicated word that I have to admit I needed to look up, the concept of due diligence. How do you ensure the safety of your staff when you send them out to knowingly dangerous and risky situations?
You can't always, but you talk to your insurance providers, you talk to your partners, you try to get on the ground and find the situation that's really happening, and then once you get on the ground, you make sure you try to think of every possible problem that's going to come and how you're going to react and how you're going to communicate. But it's a fluid situation. So as Anthony said, you've got communication structures and trees, and you have your primary communication, and then you have your telegraph, your WhatsApp, and you have so many multiple channels. But again, you can't plan for everything. And I think for us, the biggest risk is someone getting in a car accident or getting sick.
Which can happen even in Belgium. Sorry for the Belgians that are sitting here.
So yeah, working with people like International SOS and similar companies, they're very experienced at this, and you know, companies like that are a really good source when things don't work right. And we've had to medevac people in a number of situations.
Yeah. So talking about the importance of insurance when in the framework of due diligence, in the moving space, what is the responsibility of a moving company when something goes horribly, horribly wrong towards their clients and their staff?
I think number one is people. You know, keep your people safe. Curt's touched on, you know, you can't always protect people in these situations, and certainly there are very specialist insurers who would deal with those kind of operations and look at the level of risk involved. But I think number one is, you know, stuff can be replaced. You know, clients will be emotional. There will be sentimental value to things that are in there, but ultimately stuff can be replaced. People can't. So number one, keep your staff safe. Number two, be a prudent insured to do everything you can to minimise loss and damage. You know, one of the biggest challenges we face, for example, with a warehouse fire in the UK, which won't have a sprinkler system because insurers don't want sprinkler systems on warehouses that are containing all these goods, which is quite different to other countries around the world, is the fire brigade will not go in there.
Oh, wow.
If there's no risk to life, they won't go in. So number one is keep the people safe. Number two is stuff can be replaced. It's unfortunate, but it can be. And as a company, make sure you've got the relevant policies that are providing that protection to your people and your customers' goods.
That's fascinating. I didn't know that the fire brigade wouldn't go in if there's, especially now with all the risk of the lithium-ion batteries.
we're currently going through that with clients. We're talking to them about lithium-ion batteries and the risks that are involved with them. There's a piece in the FIDI magazine this month. You know, it's a very difficult scenario. You can't mitigate that completely, but we have clients ringing us saying, oh, I want to store 300 e-scooters. We're like, okay, we don't think you should do that. And they go, well, you know, they're not going to charge them, they're not going to do this, not going to do that. And we're like, we understand all that, but if something else happens, they are one of the strongest accelerants you could possibly have sitting in your warehouse for that fire. So, yeah, you know, you can't manage every risk, but we try and give the best advice we can. And I think ultimately you'll see with things like lithium-ion, there'll start to be some exclusions. Insurers will just say, we're not going to take that risk on. But that's a developing piece.
Yeah, which FIDI is working on very much with IAM as well, to see how we can make sense of it in our world and serve the clients, and at the same time follow the legal requirements, which can sometimes be a bit of a complicated situation. I would say what we really want to have people understand here is that risk is not something that happens far, far, far away, but it can happen at every single moment, every single day in your companies and in your countries as well. So from your points of view, what would be your number one recommendation or your number one best practice to any let's take a smaller to medium-sized company at the very beginning of identifying and defining their risk strategy? Where should they start?
I think embrace risk. You know, if you're not going to take any risks, you won't grow your company. And playing it safe in business, especially today, you're dead. It's a slow death coming. And so, you know, I always tell my staff, if you're not making mistakes, you're not trying hard enough. You just don't keep making the same mistake over and over. So I think people have to get comfortable with risk. They have to understand that that's natural. If you go into work every day and you're calm and you have no risk, I think that's a problem. So once you embrace it, then you can sit down and plan and figure out where you want to take the business from there.
What about you, Ebru? What would you tell someone when they're faced with 100% inflation, and you have signed your contracts with clients that don't understand what that kind of inflation
and
actually
your
means?
currency's falling apart.
Yeah.
Figure out a way to make money. You have to, you know, you've got to figure it out. It's not the first time, like you said, in your country, hyperinflation, currencies falling apart. Brazil, you know, we're talking to them. They have trouble making payments outside the country. You've just got to figure out a way to survive. And, you know, it's not a top-down structure. It's the people who are actually doing the work that you need to set the environment to let them freely share ideas without the feeling that they're going to get in trouble for making suggestions or so. Yeah, you've got to figure it out.
What about you?
And in such cases, like most of the time, international transport is euro based on foreign currency. But since the inflation is too high, our costs are high, and the increase of the currency is not as high as the inflation ratio. But we can't go back to our agents and try to increase our rates. Unfortunately, we need to absorb to, you know, it's tough times for everyone. I think it's very important that when you do your risk assessment, it shouldn't be a check mark. I mean, it shouldn't be just on the paper. Communication within the company. I mean, we review everything much more frequently than ever. We spend so much time with our clients to make sure that, I mean, some of our, especially DSP local contracts are based on Turkish lira, and they all agree to have an amendment. It changes every 3 months. So even with the foreign currencies, clients are okay to have a moderate increase with the official inflation rate. But we need to communicate, we need to review them constantly. And I want to also add that, like you also said, diversify your business, especially in the fragile economies we are in. When one goes slow, the other one picks up. and that's how you can keep operating.
Yeah, you know, and if you're operating in a country where you can't freely exchange the currency, well, do something with it. Buy an apartment, rent it to an expat. You know, so you see these type of smart decisions by companies instead of saying, well, we can't sell you in our local currency. We only want international currencies. Well, you're going to lose your business. So you've got to figure out different ways of doing things.
Yeah, I remember, I don't know if someone from JJ Murray is in here from Venezuela. I remember having a very interesting conversation with them when they joined FIDI a few years ago, about how they said how Venezuela is another one of those complicated countries to operate and live in. And they had fascinating, for example, training programs for their staff, because it was important for them and their staff, but also because it helped them maintain security in their company, because a well-trained and loyal staff would help protect the facilities as well. Mm-hmm. And so it was something that I found it fascinating to see how the mindset completely shifts when you are in a constantly complicated and difficult country, right? Anthony, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think to piggyback off of what Curt said, it's like, you know, you've got to certainly embrace change, but that's got to be deeper into your organization. It's got to be part of the fabric of the culture of the organization. So, you know, we have all kinds of different risks within our business. All of us do. We certainly just have to be able to prioritize what are the top priority ones and then address those specifically. So I would say just certainly, preparation, and then have flexibility around those two parts. And on the preparation piece, you certainly need to practice whatever mitigation factors that you have in place in order to resolve those issues. And don't underestimate the talent within your organization. I already said that once, but you have very smart people in your organization, and they know better about how to deal with those issues, and you need to collectively put those together and then run them up on the priority list, and then that way you have a plan in place. So it's part of your strategic plan on an annual basis to embed that into the organization.
And the flexibility, as you said.
And the flexibility.
Because I
It's
see
always
so many people and companies freeze when the plan doesn't work. Well, we have a plan. It's on paper. Okay, the plan's not working, then what?
Yeah, from an insurance perspective, it's quite interesting because, you know, we've worked with clients for 20 years, we have close personal working relationships with people, and then when a disaster happens, it is wrought with emotion and fear. And having those close personal working relationships, you appreciate that, but your role as an insurance broker is you have to almost detach yourself. And you have to be the person that can help them make logical, considered decisions. And the biggest takeaway for me is talk to your insurance provider early in any of these processes. There can be a natural fear of talking to them, especially if you feel that there may be an element of fault involved in something that's happened. But the reality is the earlier they're in the piece, the better the outcome is going to be overall.
Yeah. So it's a question of which always comes back to trust, right? You need to trust everybody involved, be it your staff, be it your insurance company, which is often seen as the opposing.
And the perfect example I would give is, you know, you can be an excellent risk manager, you can be a very professionally run business, and the guy next door to you can be bad, and he catches fire, and the next thing your world has all turned on an axis. No matter what you do, that risk is there, and you just have to accept it. But your insurance provider, that's what they're there for. You know, we're never going to go, hooray, this is great. It's going to be a difficult conversation. But our job at that point is to step in and give you the best result and your clients the best result we possibly can from a very difficult situation.
So my one big takeaway, which I actually quite like, is the fact of having to embrace change. Don't go against it. You have to absolutely embrace change. Have a plan, but don't necessarily stick to it if you see that it doesn't work. So you need the agility. Communication comes back a lot. Communication through all levels, up and down, and especially communications towards your clients, because as you say, emotions can get really, really raw, and the worst thing in a difficult situation is not knowing what is happening. So that's one of my takeaway from what I've heard today. And that, as to your point, stuff can be replaced. That the most important thing is the safety of the people, whether it's your staff and your clients. shit happens, and you just need to make sure that it is really the people that are
And
protected.
if you don't look after the people first, they'll figure it out pretty quickly.
As well, yeah, that's true. Talking about a talent retention thing, yeah, absolutely. I think we are now up for questions.
Thank you very much. Working? Yes. Apart from the fact that my takeaway is that Belgium is a very terrible country to live in, so I should
love boring Belgium.
Thanks so much for telling me that. I was just wondering, movers are often allergic to telling their customers about risks. To what extent do you involve your customer in that risk assessment, particularly in countries in crisis like Turkey or the countries where you operate in Curt?
Sorry,
So, to what extent do you involve your customers in the risk assessments that they have when they move to countries in crisis like your countries and the countries with its Curt range?
I mean, involving the client to the risk assessments.
Yeah, tell them about it or involve them.
I mean, when it comes to financial, it is very obvious. They are going through the same process. And we have some, like I said, we are discussing quite frequently about the situation. And you hear them crying to you. I mean, how tough it is for them internally. I mean, even in the diplomatic consulates, I had to face some of the times. So it's quite natural to involve them because they know the facts of the country.
If it's on the moving side and it's a personal move, they don't really want to hear about it. They say, how hard can it be? Get some guys, pack some boxes, put it in a container, it shows up. You're the professional. They really don't want to hear about it. They don't want to know about containers falling off of ships, most people. On the logistics side, very deeply. So we're constantly in discussion about things that can go wrong and whose risk it is. Usually it all falls back on us. But it's a very extensive discussion. But if it has to move quickly, you're still talking about it. And as I was saying, all these aid organizations that we work with, the first or second question is, what about insurance? So who's going to cover it when it goes wrong? Besides nobody.
When it comes to projects, they in fact want to know themselves. They ask the question.
And they want a detailed process map and transportation plan and each step of the way. And
I would be interested to know how the World Bank does it as from a customer point of view and sending people to complicated countries as well. How do you get involved with your suppliers to mitigate? That would be interesting.
First of all, if it's covered by the insurance. Because sometimes there are some risk countries that are not covered by the insurance. So then the premium.
Yep.
So it's challenging for clients that it's normally more expensive and the budget increase.
Yeah, which is again back to this communication side of things. You need to communicate as early as possible. Yeah.
This is not really a question, it's just an observation, picking up on what Malcolm had said. I used to run a moving company, I don't anymore, but I used to. And one Sunday night in October in 1982, we woke up to find that the entire place had burnt down. We lost everything in the warehouse, we lost all the offices that were built inside the warehouse, every scrap of paper. There were no computers in those days, so nothing was backed up. We lost all the vehicles and all the equipment. It was a raw, terrible experience. We were insured, the business survived, but my goodness, it would have been easier if we'd have just insured a little more and not tried to skimp on the insurance that we had. And so that is just from experience. I wouldn't want anybody else to experience that. Please do not, let me say it rather than Malcolm say it, do not skimp on your insurance. It really isn't worth it.
So maybe the first step to do when you get out of here and back to your offices is go speak with your insurance company.
Check your policy.
Magali, I had a question, if you don't mind. Curt, you mentioned about your big concerns would be of your staff would be travel, sickness, and a car accident. Small anecdotal story, 2 months ago, on a pack job, moving from the Toronto area to Ottawa, domestic move, a Royal Canadian Mounted Police officer. One of my employees died talking to the customer on his front lawn. So he dropped dead of a heart attack. The client, being a first responder, dropped down and performed first responding techniques, mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, et cetera, et cetera. And the client rode with our employee to the hospital in the ambulance. He stayed by his side until his family arrived. It was such a heartwarming humanitarian story, but a little bit morbid this morning. But in terms of death, I mean that of anyone in this crisis, Curt, that must be on your list of risks. Probably very low risk for any of us. It was a really unfortunate situation for our company, but death in your parts and how you operate, and just death in general. I mean, it's a risk, but albeit a low one. But some commentary around that would be interesting.
No, it's horrible. We've had to deliver the bodies of truck drivers back to their village, and this village lived off of this truck, and the truck fell off a mountain, and they had no communication, so bringing that body back to an extended family is really horrible. And yeah, we've had quite a few deaths. It's probably one of the worst things we have to deal with.
Insurance really doesn't help much in that situation at all either, right? So
Yeah,
it's more of a sort of an internal kind of culture in terms of how you manage that.
Yeah, I mean, and you have to settle with the families. I think, I don't know if it's called blood money or
Blood
what,
money, I was gonna ask,
Yeah,
yeah.
you have to settle, and you have to make the situation right.
I think
We
also,
can't end on that. Please, someone with a more
I
uplifting
don't think
story.
that's in any of your coverage.
well, no, just,
No.
I would say, I mean, obviously it is a difficult subject, but an insurance can't replace a person.
Yeah.
But we have seen situations where, in the UK, where someone has come off the back of a truck loading, and they haven't died, but they'll never work again. And the insurance has responded. And that is important because, in a situation like that, you just don't want to be thinking, how's this person going to receive care for the rest of their life? That's taken care of. I just need to worry about trying to be a decent person. So there are policies that will respond and do the right thing, but clearly
That's
it
not
doesn't replace
healthcare.
a
That's
person.
more national healthcare. That's not cargo insurance, is it? That's
No, I'm talking about you having workers' compensation or public liability,
workplace insurance.
and it's important because there are situations that you just do not foresee, but it responds.
So I think one of the best things, when we work on a U.S. government project, they have a defense base insurance. So any of our staff that steps foot on a base has to be covered with the same insurance, I believe it is, a U.S. longshoreman. So we've had situations where people have, goods have fallen off trucks, people have lost limbs. They're covered for life. So they were flown to the best hospitals in Germany, treated well, and they're covered. It's all of the other non-U.S. government situations that are self-covered.
But it can also happen at the warehouse, like
Yeah.
while we had an incident years ago, forklift driver doing something with another packer, and somehow there was an accident, and the guy had a serious injury which he couldn't work. So it doesn't necessarily be in a very risky environment. It could happen at the warehouse.
Even if you're right, you're wrong. So we had a guy fall off the truck, break his leg, went into hospital, checked himself out against doctor's orders, went home, had a blood clot, heart
my
attack,
God.
died.
So,
But you
yeah.
have to go settle with the family
Yes.
in this country.
I think the takeaway for me in terms of risk management, in terms of the spirit of the conversation this morning, is really around, we made therapists available, but these are kind of, they're blue collar, hardworking guys. I mean, they're not going to sit there and talking to a grief counselor. It's just some of them, yes, but most of them were just kind of just get on with it. I got to go to work tomorrow. I've got to provide for my family. And I think that just culturally in our company, what we've learned is that we've been very, I think we've overlooked some of the quiet noise that maybe people are impacting by it. So we've now sort of just tried to create these forums where we meet and have a chat with the guys, more one-on-ones. But that's the kind of, I think, the stuff that's a bit fuzzy and gray, that it's not necessarily in your risk mitigation policies, but you know, people are, in this day and age, we're sensitive folks. There's lots of mental health issues, and something like this really can trigger a lot of anxiety in your
even
company.
that guy knows if you're cutting corners. And I remember one of my first jobs, I worked for my father. That's why I'm amazed at all the family businesses that work, because this one didn't. And my first day, and you know, my dad told me, you know, if you can get a job at Boeing, Cessna, Learjet, Beach, you do, and then I'm down here. And so he was metal forming, and we walked out, and he said, every one of these people has court orders, you know, taking their pay for some reason. He said, none of them have been past high school, but he said, don't be fooled. They know health and safety law better than any lawyer in Kansas. And he said, you know, they're not book smart, but they're very smart people, and they're great at their job. But they're going to know, too, if you're putting them in danger or you're trying to maximize your profit and putting them in, you know, unnecessary risky position.
Yeah, that's back to what Anthony was saying before, right? That you really have to maybe flip the model around and use the expertise of your people, of your staff, to actually, so that the policy makes sense. And it's not just a tick box exercise.
Well, most people won't volunteer the answer. If you don't create an environment, if you go in and just lecture to the staff, this is what we're doing, you won't get the right answer. So
You've got to find the safety champion within your organization, and there's always somebody there, and that's got to be part of the culture. Because, I mean, like all of you, we've got a lot of moving parts. So every day when the trucks leave the yard at Dyer, I mean, that's my number one concern, is obviously if somebody gets in a car accident and injures themselves. So the training around, you know, all the qualifications that are necessary to have good quality drivers that are driving safe, but then having people police themselves within the organization, that if you're not doing the right thing, that it's addressed, and that way that, you know, everybody comes home at the end of the day.
and the policies, as you said, truck drivers, that used to be one of my biggest nightmares. Is in a lot of our countries, if there was a school holiday, the truck driver brought his children with them in the truck, or their girlfriends or friends. And, you know, there's been accidents where people have died, and immediately I thought, oh, you know, I hope they didn't have their children. You know, you have a policy, but is it being followed?
Yeah.
I think also, I mean, I mentioned earlier about insurance being sold on fear, and these are stories that fill us with fear. So let me try and, something a bit more positive, but to maybe as we draw to an end. But one of the things we've seen in the UK is what they call early access intervention programs have become a bigger thing, and insurance companies offering these. You know, mental health's become a bigger issue for staff, and we actually employed one ourselves in our own business. It's completely confidential, it's anonymous. I, as the owner of that policy, know if it's been used, and I know how many times it's been used, so I can see that it's provided some value. And it has clearly been used by people in my business. And I think culturally, when you talk about managing risk and you talk about engaging your staff and them caring about how things work, something like that sends a very clear message out to your staff that you actually care about them. And I know the mental health picture has really swung around following the pandemic, but there's some real validity to some of the things that are being said. And there's some interesting products out there now that might be worth looking at that can help your staff when they're having a difficult time.
I think there's one more question here.
Hi, I'm from RMC, and I just want to note that we started, I was actually before the Ukraine war, started doing some tabletop exercises, sort of like simulated with some of the movers, some FIDI movers, about how they would handle a crisis. Before Ukraine, it was more about, suppose we had some environmental type thing in California. After Ukraine, it was more that. I just want to point out that we've talked to clients about that, those exercises, and they really like it. So I'm not trying to say there's an opportunity here, but I do think that if movers, you know, forwarders start doing those tabletop exercises some more, it's something that you can promote to your clients, that you're preparing. It's you know, they say that it's really hard to planning is everything before a crisis and doesn't mean much after, because the crisis never works the way you did, but it does build a certain, it helps you, just helps you prepare. So, just a thought.
I think on that Phil's had a similar comment.
I don't know if this is a appropriate question, but listening to your situation, Derek, when you had one of your employees dropping dead in front of a customer, and it involves the customer, whether they're a corporate client or a customer, do we have a risk profile coming up whereby we can be sued by customers in situations where the human part of us does the right thing, but then they see it as an opportunity to then sue the company for the situation, what the consequences of that, the mental well-being of that customer because they were in this particular traumatic experience. I mean, we're talking about one-offs, but we do have an appetite of people. If I can get something out of it, then I'm going to go for it.
Yeah, the short answer is yes, there's an exposure, because we live in a world where, unfortunately, people see that as an opportunity. I think it would have a very slim chance of success, given what we know about the situation. I think what's incredibly frustrating for any company is when that situation occurs, in my mind, it should be no. No chance, not interested, go away. The reality is it will be something like a 12 to 24-month process of solicitor costs, all kinds of things, and it will be hugely expensive to deal with, and I would hope would end up with no. The other brutal reality, and every territory is different, is it probably ends up in some kind of commercial settlement. And it's hugely frustrating as an insurance broker who is proud of how insurance reacts. One of my biggest frustrations is that commercial decisions that are made when you just know that something is morally wrong.
So
But
what
there's no
about
point
like
not being
Good
honest.
Samaritan laws? So where someone's having a heart attack and your employee gets in and tries to help, but then they get sued later on to say you actually caused more damage.
But
In a lot of countries, that's a big problem.
But the UAE, for example, I remember I passed my driver's license in the UAE.
Wow.
And when
So
that's
amazing.
And in the theory class, the question was, what do you do if you see in a car accident on the side and you see someone bleeding? What do you do? And of course, the answer is, I go and save them. They're like, no, you don't touch them, because if you have blood on yourself, which is not yours, you can go to prison. Yeah. Even if you were there to help and you didn't do anything that caused the person's death. So yeah, that was a big life lesson for me.
Yeah.
So on that note, yay, thank you for a very entertaining morning. Next time I need to choose my topics maybe a bit better. Thank you very much for sitting so diligently with us. I do hope you learned something through us. Something that I learned, I think the biggest message is embrace change because you can't do anything about it. Embrace risk because you can't do anything about it. Do note that, again, training is very, very important. FIDI has a lot of training material on risk policies, risk management, frame-related processes. So take advantage of that. Use your FAME audit. You have to do it anyway. So use your FAME audit as a good opportunity to check and make sure that your risk policies really do make sense for your reality. And with that, I would say thank you very much to all of our panelists for tackling this difficult project.